So now we're going to go over how colonization leads to infection, which ultimately leads to disease. So we want to look at that connection between colonization and how does it get to this disease point. There are 5 steps to the process of a colonizing bacteria becoming a disease, or doesn't just have to be bacteria, any kind of microorganism. And so the first step is going to be becoming established. Now this will apply to the first 3 steps. So steps 1 through 3 are all to do with becoming established, but there's going to be multiple aspects to this. So the first part, step 1, is going to be the portals of entry. So first, a microorganism has to actually get inside the human body in order to cause infection and disease. So portals of entry, there's going to be ways that it goes about that. Step 2 is going to be attaching to the host. So there's certain features of microbes that we've learned about attaching to the host that are beneficial for this attachment. So you can think about fimbriae or capsules can help be sticky. So there's different aspects of your microorganisms that are going to be helpful in attaching to the host. Step 3 will be surviving host defenses. So we went over the different host defenses in the last unit, but now we're going to talk about how the microbes survive them. So, surviving host defenses. And then for step 4 is actually going to be causing disease. Step 5 will be the portals of exit, how the microbe leaves the host. All right, so now that we know our 5 steps in the process of going from a microorganism colonizing to infecting to causing disease. So we have our 5 steps, but let's go in depth in more of these sections. So the first step was portals of entry, so how the microbe is actually going to enter the body. Now, when we think about this, we've already talked about our first line of defense being the physical barriers like our skin and mucous membranes, which serve as a very effective protective layer from microbes. Now, if we have any nicks or abrasions in our skin, any damaged skin can actually be a very easy portal of entry for microorganisms, which is why it's so important that we keep any cuts or nicks in our skin clean, because any microbes that could otherwise be present at the site of a cut can cause an infection. So that's why it's important that we keep any broken skin clean and clear from any potential pathogens. The second step is attaching to the host. So as I mentioned before, there's certain tools that bacteria, viruses, fungi, protozoa, that all of those microorganisms have that help them in attaching to the host. And so some of those tools are things like fimbriae, that allow the bacteria to stick to the host cells. You also have things like slime layers and capsules that give bacteria and other pathogenic microorganisms a sort of sticky outer coat that helps them stick and make sure that they are attached to the host, and that way they're able to actually be more pathogenic. Step 3 is surviving host defenses. So this is going to play really nicely with what we learned in the last chapter. So since we've learned all about the host defenses and how our body normally can fight off bacteria and viruses that enter our body, so now that we know we have cells like phagocytes that can actually just engulf bacteria and chew them up, spit them out, how do we even end up with an infection to begin with, right? Well, some bacteria can produce certain factors that will make them either impossible to engulf or very physically difficult for phagocytes to engulf them. That can be things like capsules or slime layers. That can make it really hard for phagocytes to do their job and to just eat up those bacteria. Therefore, the bacteria can be present for longer and cause more damage. Something else that bacteria can do is actually release toxic substances for phagocytes, so it will outright kill them if the bacteria is present. It can secrete those toxins, and then the phagocytes will die before they can actually fight off that bacteria. So that's how bacteria are actually able to survive against our natural host defenses and wreak havoc on our body. We've made it to step 4, causing disease. So now that our microbes have made it into the body, they've attached to the host cell, they've survived the host defenses, now they're actually going to mess things up. And so how they do this is through one of 3 possible ways. So the first way would be secreting, sorry for the noises. The first way would be secreting toxic chemicals, which are known as toxins, or secreting certain enzymes that cause an overreaction, that will directly damage our host cells. And so these can be like lipopolysaccharide is one that we've already encountered in this class. That is an endotoxin that is released by gram-negative bacteria. So that LPS can cause fever and inflammation when it is released when the bacterial cell lyses. Now you also can have this disease caused by an overreaction, got ahead of myself earlier, the overreaction of the body's defenses. And so when a bacteria or a virus causes this overreaction, those defenses can actually cause damage to our own body. So sometimes we kind of go into overdrive and cause damage on ourselves. And then finally, bacteria, viruses, other microorganisms that are pathogenic to us can cause damage, I'm sorry, my cats are being loud, can cause damage by altering the host cell genome. So what they do is actually make changes, not in our DNA sequence, but they modify the DNA sequence. So they can add groups kind of onto the outside of our DNA, and it changes how that DNA can be processed, how it can be transcribed. And so when this happens, it's going to alter the function, because if we alter not the DNA sequence, but how it can be transcribed into mRNA and then turned into proteins, that's going to disrupt the normal cell function. So this is another way that these microbes can kind of wreak havoc on our body. Now, sometimes these epigenetic changes, that's what it's called whenever you modify the DNA in some way, is epigenetics. Now, this can be temporary, or it can also be permanent. So it's important to recognize that if you permanently alter, have some modifications to the DNA, that can actually be passed down to your offspring. So epigenetics is a really interesting field, it's a little bit up and coming with scientific studies, more and more that we're learning about epigenetics. But epigenetics can actually be passed on. So these are like modifications to the DNA, not an actual change in the sequence, but different groups that can be added on that will change the way that that DNA is processed. So this is a really important concept to understand in terms of human health, because it's something that can not only affect that individual based on an infection that they have, but it can actually affect their offspring as well, so this can be passed on through generations. So that's the disease-causing step of the colonization to disease. But now let's talk about the last step, which is step 5, and that's going to be when we actually reach our portals of exit. So portals of exit refers to the microbe actually vacating the host. Right, so this can happen in multiple routes, but this is going to be termed our portals of exit. So this can be through means of coughing and sneezing. This can be through blood, through open lesions on the skin, urine, feces, or through an insect bite, which can, take up some of the infected blood from an individual. Now, how well a microbe is able to go through these processes by establishing itself within the host and then causing disease in the host. So how well it does this is referred to as its virulence, or how pathogenic it is. So this means that it's better at causing infections. So the more virulent a microorganism is, the better it is at getting inside of the host and causing an infection. Now, there are certain factors that will make it easier for a microorganism to cause infection. And so those are going to be some of the factors that we talked about in those steps. A great example is the capsule. By forming a capsule, we saw that it's going to help the microorganism attach to the host, but it's also going to help it evade host defenses, which will ultimately lead to it infecting the host more easily. So that's an example of a virulence factor. There are plenty of them to go over, and this is something that you should talk about with your project, is how it evades the host defenses. So that's going to be including some of its virulence factors. So I hope this was helpful in going over section 2 of chapter 13.